A shroud of dust and confusion choked the Chicago air in the wake of the catastrophe. "Leave him! He's gone!" the first responders shouted, their voices strained as their optimism dwindled. Yet a small girl crawled determinedly toward the spot where the man's broken form lay. Her small hand shook as she reached out, pressing a forgotten hope back into his still chest, and the event that followed left everyone speechless. The service elevator whined as it ascended the skeletal structure of the Newcroft Enterprises Tower. 40 stories above the bustling streets of Chicago, the wind coming off Lake Michigan howled through the incomplete building, making the steel beams sing a mournful tune and whispering through exposed concrete like restless spirits. Inside the freight lift, Julian Croft, 39, stood in solitude. He was sharply dressed in a tailored wool coat, though a fine layer of construction dust coated his expensive shoes and the hems of his trousers. In one hand, he held a rolled-up blueprint that drooped slightly. In the other, his phone vibrated with insistent persistence. The screen showed the name Olivia Croft, his sister. Julian ignored the call, letting it go to voicemail. They hadn't exchanged a word since the bitter settlement of their father's estate, leaving a chasm of unspoken grievances between them. He refused to answer. As the screen went dark, it reflected the face of a man who looked as though he hadn't truly slept in weeks. Beneath the meticulously controlled facade, there was a hollowness that seemed to swallow the light, and a jaw set so tight it must have ached. He blinked slowly as the elevator juddered to a halt, then stepped out onto the vast open floor. The concrete under his polished leather shoes was rough and uneven, strewn with discarded caution tape, stray pieces of rebar, and the mingled sense of progress and peril. Workers moved with purpose around him, their shouts lost in the cacophony of generators and power drills, but he was deaf to it all. He walked to the edge of the floor, gazing out at the magnificent, sprawling skyline. This was his kingdom, his legacy, his future. And yet, inside, he felt an unnerving void. "You're a bit early, Mr. Croft," the site foreman called out, hurrying over with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a hard hat in hand. Julian offered no reply. His gaze swept across the edge of the construction site with a cold, surgical detachment. He was surrounded by people, yet he remained unreachable, untouchable, utterly alone. Far below, the chaotic rhythm of the city hummed. Across the street, beyond the barricaded construction zone, a 7-year-old girl named Maya Monroe sat on a small folding stool next to her mother Clara's food truck. Clara was busy handing out steaming bowls of chili to the construction crew on their break, her weary face softening into a smile each time she glanced down at her daughter. Maya hummed a quiet tune, her legs swinging freely off the stool, a sketchbook resting open on her lap. Crayons were scattered around her nimble fingers. Then, at 10:17 a.m., the world fractured. It started with a sharp pop, followed by a deep rumble. And then a section of the building seemed to open to hell itself. A sudden, ear-splitting blast tore through the tower's base. Steel beams shrieked in protest. Workers cried out in terror. A violent shock wave ripped through the scaffolding like paper. Above Julian, the elevator cables gave way with the sharp crack of a rifle shot. His body was thrown violently, and his world turned upside down. From her vantage point below, Maya watched as the colossal structure shuddered and groaned, as if it were begging for mercy. A plume of dust and debris billowed outward, engulfing the street in a sudden sandstorm. A massive beam snapped and plummeted, crashing through the lower floors with a gut-wrenching crunch. "Maya, get back!" Clara screamed, reaching desperately for her daughter. But the girl was already in motion, ducking under a line of police tape and slipping past a firefighter who stood frozen in shock. Something had beckoned her, an invisible force, that no one else could perceive. Within the wreckage, rescue teams began the grim task of pulling bodies from the rubble. A half-collapsed stairwell led them to a man pinned beneath a slab of cracked concrete and tangled rebar. A paramedic quickly checked his vital signs. "No pulse," he announced grimly. "He's gone." "The ID says he's Julian Croft," someone else murmured. "Dear God." The fire chief, a grizzled man in his 50s with a face caked in ash, stepped forward. "Call it. We need to focus our resources on the living." It was at that moment that Maya appeared, crawling over the treacherous debris with a focus that made the seasoned rescuers freeze. "Kid, you can't be in here," a firefighter yelled, reaching out to grab her, but she evaded his grasp. Her bright red hoodie now streaked with mud, her knees scraped raw. Her eyes, however, held a strange and unnerving calm as she knelt beside Julian's motionless form. "Mommy used to bring people back," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. She placed her small hands on his chest, not in the way a medic would, not performing CPR. Her fingers pressed against specific points on his torso, a pattern that no one around her recognized. "Get her out of there," one of the men shouted. "Stop, he's already dead." Another screamed in frustration. But just as a paramedic lunged forward to pull her away, it happened. Julian's body arched with a sudden, violent gasp. His chest convulsed. A low, wet sound tore from his throat as air was forced back into his cold lungs. One of the rescuers stumbled backward in sheer terror, nearly tripping over a jagged piece of metal. "Jesus Christ," he choked out. "He's alive. He's actually alive." The entire team stood frozen. Monitors were hastily reattached. The vitals were faint, but they were undeniably there. And in the midst of this controlled chaos, Maya simply stood up, breathing heavily, as if a great energy had just passed through her. She looked up at the stunned faces of the crew. "He wasn't all the way gone," she said simply. In the pandemonium that ensued, the press caught wind of the miraculous rescue. A news helicopter began to circle overhead. Reporters swarmed the blocked-off streets. Who was this little girl? How had she gotten past the barricades? And what exactly had she done to the billionaire CEO who had been declared dead just moments before? Clara, frantic with worry, finally found Maya standing near an ambulance. "Sweetheart, what were you thinking?" she cried, wrapping her arms tightly around the small girl. Maya only looked back at the mountain of rubble and whispered, "He looked so empty, I had to try." A medic, captivated by the scene, snapped a photo of Maya as she walked away, her hand still smudged with dust, while Julian Croft was carefully wheeled into the ambulance, alive, but still unconscious. And somewhere in the haze of the unfolding drama, a journalist murmured into his recorder, "That little girl just saved a man who was dead for 4 minutes. How in the world did she do that?" The world returned to Julian Croft in disconnected fragments, voices that made no sense, light that felt like daggers against his eyes, and the slow, creeping realization that he was not dead, but hovering in a liminal space between agony and disbelief. When he finally managed to open his eyes, all he could see was a sterile white ceiling. It was the ceiling of a room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, a monitor beeping beside him like a relentless accusation, and the faint shadow of a nurse adjusting the IV line connected to his arm. His throat felt raw and burned. He tried to move, but a searing pain shot through his spine like fire racing along exposed nerves. Panic seized him first, followed swiftly by a wave of pure rage. He was a prisoner, inside his own body. "Mr. Croft," a calm voice said, "you're safe now. You've been unconscious for 32 hours. The doctor, a tall man with tired eyes and an impeccably clean white coat, observed him with caution. "I need you to try to remain still. You've sustained a severe spinal trauma. There's significant swelling around your lumbar region. Julian's voice came out as a guttural growl. How bad? The doctor paused for a moment. You may not walk again. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Julian's breath caught in his chest. His hands clenched the thin hospital blanket. Do you know who I am? He rasped, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube. You don't, he broke off, coughing violently. You don't tell me what I can't do. Sir, the doctor said gently, I'm simply telling you the facts. Julian glared at him, every ounce of his formidable pride rising from the ashes of his broken body. Get out, he hissed. You're fired. The doctor blinked, clearly confused. Mr. Croft, I said get out. The man left without another word, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Julian alone with the rhythmic beeping of the monitor and the low, constant hum of the air vents. He stared at his reflection in the dark surface of the television screen mounted on the opposite wall. His face was pale and bruised, with the faint impression of a breathing mask etched across his jaw. He didn't look powerful. He didn't look like the man who had built a billion-dollar empire from the ground up. He looked like something broken. When the door opened again, he expected it to be a nurse. Instead, a small figure stood half hidden behind the privacy curtain, a flash of red from a familiar hoodie. It was Maya Monroe. She hesitated for a moment, clutching something small in her hand. For a long moment, Julian just stared, his mind struggling to connect the image. The child who had crawled through fire and ruin to touch him was now standing in his hospital doorway like a ghost from a surreal dream. What are you doing here? His voice cracked more than he intended. Maya didn't flinch. A nurse said you were awake. I wanted to see. He tried to sit up, then winced as a fresh wave of pain shot through his lower back. You shouldn't be here. She took a small, stubborn step forward. You were too quiet, she said simply. I thought you needed help. He blinked. What? That day, she explained, her voice soft but steady. You weren't breathing, but it didn't feel like you were gone. My mom used to say that sometimes people just forget how to come back. Her name was Clara. She had been a hospice nurse before she had me. She used to say there were ways to help people find their way back if you just knew how to listen. Julian stared at her. This little girl, who couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds, was speaking to him as if she had witnessed things no child should ever see. Her placid demeanor unnerved him more than the explosion itself had. You're not scared of me? He asked finally. Maya tilted her head, studying his face with an unnerving intensity. You were hurting, that's all. Something inside him faltered. For years, he had constructed walls around himself so high that no one dared to even look him in the eye. His employees feared him. His investors idolized him. But this small, fearless girl just stood there, her gaze filled with no judgment, no awe, and no fear. Only truth. The room suddenly felt smaller, the machines too loud. He swallowed hard, his gaze shifting to her hand. What's that you've got? Maya opened her palm. A small, crocheted angel charm rested there. Its yarn wings were slightly frayed and smudged with dust. I left this for you, she said. I made it with my mom before, a long time ago. She said it keeps people warm on the inside. He frowned, confused. Warm on the inside? Maya nodded. You didn't look warm. He wanted to laugh at the sheer absurdity of the statement, but something caught in his throat. Instead, he took the angel with fingers that trembled more than he wanted her to notice. The yarn was rough, the stitches simple and homemade. He turned it over in his hand, expecting nothing, and yet it was still faintly warm, as if it held the memory of the small hands that had crafted it. For the first time since the explosion, the hollow echo in his chest seemed to shift. He didn't understand it, and that scared him. "I should go," Maya said finally, glancing toward the hallway. "Wait," he called after her. She stopped, her hand on the door. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said. "Maya Monroe." He nodded slowly, trying the name out like a prayer he didn't know he needed. "Thank you, Maya." She offered a quick, shy smile. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. J." "Mr. J?" "That's what the nurses call you," she said with a small grin. "It's shorter than the man who almost died." He couldn't help it. A short, broken laugh escaped him. The sound startled both of them. It was the first time he had laughed in years. When she left, the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. The room still felt sterile and cold, but on his nightstand sat the little crocheted angel. Its uneven stitches caught the light like small, imperfect stars. He reached out and placed his hand beside it, his palm flat against the cool surface of the table, close enough to feel its faint warmth again. His eyes drifted shut, and for the first time since waking, he didn't feel like he was falling apart. Outside the door, Maya peeked back through the small glass panel in the door. The man in the bed didn't look like the stern photograph she had once seen in a newspaper. He looked lost, lonely, and maybe even a little kind. She whispered softly to herself, "You'll be okay, Mr. J. You just forgot how to come back." Inside, Julian exhaled, a slow, uneven breath that seemed to carry more than just air. His fingers brushed against the angel one more time. And somewhere deep inside, beneath years of carefully constructed walls and emotional distance, something cracked open. That night, when the nurse came in to dim the lights, she found him asleep, his hand still resting on the tiny angel charm. The monitors hummed softly, and for the first time since the explosion, his heart rate was steady, peaceful, almost calm. And down the hall in the quiet waiting room, a little girl sat curled up beside her mother, her sketchbook open on her knees. She was drawing a tall man with a halo of golden light around his chest. Outside Chicago's magnificent skyline gleamed through the hospital windows, cold and blue. But in one room on the 12th floor, a faint golden warmth had returned, like a spark that refused to die. 2 days later, the oppressive quiet of Julian Croft's hospital suite was disturbed by a subtle shift, a misplaced sound in his otherwise pristine world. It wasn't the rhythmic beep of a monitor or the low hum of filtered air. It was the soft crinkle of paper. He opened his eyes slowly, his vision adjusting to the afternoon light that streamed through the tall windows. The sunlight didn't feel warm anymore. It just felt bright. He turned his head. On the small tray beside his bed lay a crayon drawing, folded once, and then carefully flattened. He blinked at it, unsure how it had gotten there. The edges were rough, the colors uneven, but the image was unmistakable. A man in a hospital bed, surrounded by a radiant yellow light. And beside him, a girl in a red hoodie, smiling. In the corner of the page, a crooked little heart had been drawn. Inside it were 2 letters, J+M. He exhaled slowly, unsure whether to feel stunned or absurd. Maya had been there again, and he hadn't even noticed. The suite around him looked like it had been lifted directly from the pages of a luxury design magazine, with its high-end leather seating, smart TVs, and mahogany accents. But it was empty, echoing with a profound loneliness. His laptop and phone sat on a table, untouched. There were no fresh flowers, no get-well cards, no family. He closed his eyes again, but Maya's sketch remained burned behind his eyelids. Across town, in a small 2-bedroom apartment situated above a laundromat, Clara Monroe poured leftover chili into a small pot. The kitchen was cramped and chilly, the thin windows streaked with condensation. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, scribbling intently into her sketchbook while their old space heater buzzed like an overworked bumblebee. "Maya, sweetie, we're going to have to skip the hospital today," Clara said, her eyes fixed on the pot, her voice heavy with guilt. "I've got a busted tire and I need to use what's left of our gas money for the food truck job tomorrow." She hesitated, then added, "And honestly, honey, it's not our place. We've already pushed our luck too far." Maya didn't say anything at first. She just kept coloring. Then finally, in a whisper, she said, "But he's alone." Clara turned to face her. "I know, baby, but he's a billionaire. He's got nurses, doctors, assistants. He doesn't have anyone who sees him," Maya said without looking up. "Not really." Clara sighed. She didn't know how to explain to a 7-year-old that the world didn't work like a fairy tale, that rich men didn't need little girls to save them. Or maybe, just maybe, this one did. Maya stood up and placed her new drawing on the tiny fridge, securing it with a smiley face magnet. It was another image of Julian, this time sitting in a chair beneath a tree, holding a tiny crocheted angel in his lap. The drawing had the same radiant yellow light, the same small signature in the corner. "Okay," Clara said softly. "We'll go. Just for an hour." The nurse with the sunflower pin on her scrubs had waved Maya and Clara through again, quietly ignoring protocol with a knowing smile. When they returned to the hospital that afternoon, Julian was awake. He didn't say much when Maya entered the room. He just watched her, his eyes cautious, but undeniably curious. Clara hovered near the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of protectiveness and respect. Maya didn't speak either, not at first. She simply placed something on his bedside table, a second crocheted angel, smaller than the last, but this one had little black threads sewn into its wings, making them look like tiny feathers. "This one's stronger," she said, "in case the first one gets tired." Julian stared at the little charm, then slowly picked it up. He turned it over in his fingers as if it were a foreign object. "Did your mother teach you to make these?" Maya nodded. "When she was sick. She said they were for when people felt scared." Julian blinked, his gaze dropping to the charm. "And you think I'm scared?" "You looked it," she replied simply. He coughed out a quiet laugh, but it wasn't unkind. "You're something else." "Good or bad?" she asked. Julian glanced at her. "Too early to tell?" That made her grin. Clara stepped forward. "We should get going. We don't want to wear out our welcome." But Julian looked up sharply. "Actually, you're not wearing it out." His voice was gruff, almost reluctant. "If Maya wants to come back, she can." Clara studied him for a beat. She was a woman who had learned to read people fast, especially rich ones. "What's the catch?" "No catch," Julian cleared his throat. "Just don't bring the press. I've got enough of those circling like vultures." "We stay out of sight," Clara said. "Deal." Later that evening, alone again, Julian sat in silence. He studied both angel charms. The first still sat near his pillow. The second was in his hand. For years, he'd buried himself in concrete and steel, in shareholder calls and earnings reports. He'd built towers across continents, bought silence, and burned bridges. No one got in. That was the rule. But somehow, a 7-year-old in worn-out sneakers and hand-me-down jeans had walked straight through every wall he'd ever built. He thought of her humming. She had been sitting in the corner, her legs swinging off the bench while she hummed softly. Something simple, familiar, and oddly comforting. When he had closed his eyes, he could almost feel a warmth crawl back into his chest, like a distant memory, like life itself. "Don't stop," he had whispered. He hadn't meant to say it, but she had nodded once and kept humming, her voice like the wind through pine needles. Quiet, but sure. Now, alone in the sterile suite, the silence pressed in on him harder than usual. He reached for the angel again and set it beside the new crayon drawing Maya had left behind. In it, he wasn't in bed anymore. He was sitting up, smiling. He swallowed thickly. Maybe she was right. Maybe some people don't leave. Maybe they just forget how to come back. Back at the apartment, Maya brushed her teeth while Clara watched the news on their ancient television. The media still didn't know the identity of the little girl. Grainy footage from a cell phone showed a red hoodie slipping through the rescue crews just before the body on the stretcher jolted back to life. "You're a mystery now, kid," Clara said with a soft smile. Maya spit into the sink and wiped her mouth. "I don't want to be a mystery. I just want Mr. J to stand again." Clara blinked. "You think he will?" Maya nodded. "Yeah, I saw it." She had seen it. Not hoped, not imagined. She had drawn it first. And sometimes for Maya Monroe, that was how the real world began. In crayon, before concrete. The air in the hospital courtyard was colder than one would expect for late spring in Chicago. Julian Croft sat bundled in a heavy blanket, his wheelchair positioned near a half-dead potted tree that someone had tried to revive with a string of twinkly lights and a dose of hope. His face, pale beneath a neatly trimmed beard, was angled toward the sunlight, as if daring it to warm something beyond his skin. His muscles ached, and his back throbbed with a persistent, dull pain. But worse than all of it was the profound stillness in his legs, a mutiny of flesh and bone that he refused to accept. A nurse had asked if he wanted company. He had said no. But then Maya had shown up. Her hoodie was zipped all the way to her chin, her cheeks red from the wind, her gloved hands clutching a small paper bag. Clara trailed behind her like a watchful shadow, always wary. But Maya had already breached every perimeter Julian had ever drawn. "I brought something," she announced, as if it were perfectly normal to deliver gifts to billionaires on a Tuesday. Julian raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Another angel." "Nope. Better." She opened the bag and pulled out a thermos, still warm to the touch. Hot cocoa. The real kind. From Clara's truck. She twisted the cap off and poured the rich, dark liquid into a cup with the careful precision of someone who had done this many times before. The scent hit Julian first. Dark chocolate, a hint of cinnamon, and something he hadn't smelled in years. Comfort. Maya handed it to him with both hands. "Don't spill. You don't seem like the type to wear brown." Julian accepted it with a soft huff of laughter. His fingers brushed against hers during the handoff. They were freezing. "You're cold," he said, frowning. "Where's your jacket?" "This is my jacket." Julian turned to the nurse standing nearby. "Get her a blanket," he snapped. "And not one of the scratchy ones. The good one. The Sherpa fleece we keep in the warmer." The nurse blinked, startled. "Sir, those are for—" "I know exactly what they're for. She qualifies." The nurse hurried off. Clara looked as though she might interject, but Maya was already sitting beside Julian, sipping from her own cup. "I told her not to bring me anything," Julian muttered, eyeing the thermos. "She didn't," Maya replied with a smirk. "I snuck it in. I told her you needed it." Julian looked over at her. "And how exactly did you know that?" She shrugged. "You always look cold, Mr. J." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind tugged gently at the leaves of the struggling tree above them. Somewhere, a monitor beeped through an open window. Julian took a sip of the cocoa. It was rich and velvety and slightly too sweet, but somehow it was perfect. He felt it settle inside him like a small fire being lit behind his ribs. Then, as if on instinct, Maya reached into her hoodie pocket, and pulled out a new drawing. She slid it across his lap like a secret contract. He unfolded it carefully. The crayon lines were bold this time, deliberate. It showed him standing upright wearing a hospital gown, holding a mug in one hand and an angel in the other. But what struck him the most were the wings. They weren't on the angel. They were drawn on him. "You gave me wings," he murmured. Maya nodded. "That's how I see you now." His throat tightened. From behind the glass wall of a nearby lounge, two members of his PR team stood watching. One of them whispered to the other and pointed toward the drawing. Their expressions were pale, panicked. "They're freaking out," Julian said. "Why?" "Because this," he gestured to her, to the drawing, to the cocoa in his lap, "doesn't fit their version of me." "Then maybe their version's wrong," Maya said simply. He looked at her, really looked at her. 7 years old, with worn sneakers and a messy braid, and not a hint of fear in her voice. And for the first time in decades, Julian realized he didn't want to be the man they thought he was. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "Do what?" "Draw me with light." Maya took a moment before answering. "Because light hides in people, even when they forget it's there." "You forgot." Julian stared at her, stunned. How could a child carry so much wisdom in such a small frame? Maya took another sip of cocoa, then slid her cup toward him. He frowned. "What are you doing?" "You drink too," she said. "You're still cold." "I've got mine." "But you're not drinking it?" He hesitated, then took her cup and raised it in a mock toast. "To forgotten light." Maya clinked her cup to his. From across the courtyard, Clara's expression softened just a little. When the nurse returned with the fleece blanket, Julian took it and draped it gently over Maya's shoulders himself. "Thank you," she said, snuggling into it like a bird curling into a nest. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just don't stop showing up." She looked up at him. "I won't?" As the sun dipped lower behind the hospital towers, Maya rested her head against the edge of his wheelchair. Julian sat still, watching her eyes flutter closed for a moment, just a moment, and felt a strange ache settle into his chest. It wasn't pain, but something older, something softer. It was care, the real kind. And for the first time in his adult life, he didn't want it to stop. Later, after Clara had gently scooped Maya into her arms and whispered that it was time to go, Julian wheeled himself slowly back toward his room. When he entered, his assistant was waiting with 2 laptops and a stack of reports. "You've missed 3 board calls," she said, her tone clipped. Julian glanced at the sketch still clutched in his hand. "Good," he replied. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said good. Tell them I'll reschedule." "They're not going to like that." He turned his chair toward the window. "Then maybe their version of me needs an update." She hesitated, then gathered her things and left quietly. Julian set the drawing against the lamp on his nightstand. It leaned slightly, catching the golden hue of the setting sun. His reflection in the window merged with the drawing. For a fleeting second, it looked like he really was standing there, like the wings were already his. He picked up the thermos again and took one last sip. It was still warm, just like her. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It came in whispers, in subtle shifts that rewrote the shape of the room, the air, the man. Julian Croft's hospital suite, once a mausoleum of silence and steel, now pulsed with something unexpected. Life. Crayon drawings curled at the corners on the pale blue walls. Some were lopsided, some were vibrant. Each one scrolled with the unfiltered imagination of a 7-year-old girl who saw magic where others saw machines. The faint scent of cinnamon clung to the air, mixed with something waxy and nostalgic, like an old-school art room. Maya had snuck in a tiny wax warmer shaped like a cupcake, claiming it makes rooms feel like hugs. The nurses pretended not to notice. Gone were the clinical silences that used to define his recovery. Now Julian woke to the sound of a child's giggle, the rustle of sketchbook pages, the occasional off-key hum of Maya's voice as she sang to herself while coloring. His bed felt less like a cage and more like a comfortable chair in someone's living room. He didn't know when it had happened, only that he didn't want it to end. That morning, sunlight spilled across his tray table, where two things sat side by side. His iPad, blinking with an urgent board meeting notification, and Maya's newest drawing. It was a flyer for her school's talent show, handwritten in purple crayon with stars drawn on every corner. At the bottom, in shaky letters, it read, 2 p.m. I'm going to sing. Please come, even if you're still broken. Julian stared at both for a long time. The screen kept pulsing. Strategy call. Stakeholder urgency. Join now. He reached out and without hesitation tapped the iPad off. They can wait, he muttered, placing Maya's drawing squarely on top of the dark screen. This can't. The rest of the day moved quietly. Maya came after lunch with a juice box and 2 cookies, announcing, Clara says no more cocoa until you walk again. She plopped down next to him on the edge of the couch they now shared like co-owners of the space. She told him about her rehearsals and how another kid had sung a song about chickens and gotten scared halfway through. Promise you won't laugh if I mess up, she asked. Julian tilted his head. I only laugh when people wear socks with sandals. Maya giggled and offered him half a cookie. He took it without complaint, but inside, something shifted. She didn't ask him to walk. She didn't beg. She didn't say she believed in him in that hollow way people do when they're trying to fix someone. She just kept showing up, quiet and unwavering. That night, after visiting hours had ended and the hospital had dimmed its lights into soft glows, Julian sat alone in the room. The drawings, the little blanket Maya had left behind when she fell asleep reading to him, the charm now permanently strung around the base of his lamp. They were all talismans of a life he was just beginning to understand. He wheeled himself over to the therapy bars, where he had been practicing when no one was watching. His therapist had warned him not to push too fast, but something deeper than pride was driving him now. It wasn't about proving doctors wrong. It wasn't about headlines or investors or control. It was about showing up for the one person who saw light in him. He gripped the parallel bars. His palms sweated instantly. His legs felt like they were made of lead. Still, he rose. It wasn't perfect. His left leg shook uncontrollably. Pain shot up his spine. But he stood, slowly, his breath shallow, sweat breaking out across his back. And when he looked up, Maya was there. She hadn't said anything, just stood in the doorway, clutching her sketchbook, her eyes wide. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. She didn't cry. She didn't clap. She just walked toward him. Her hand reached up and clasped his. I knew you could. His eyes stung. He didn't speak. He couldn't. He was still trembling, unsure if this moment was real. But her small hand, warm and sure in his, grounded him more than any railing ever could. They turned slowly toward the large glass window. Their reflections stared back. A man, once broken, now standing, and a girl who had never doubted that he would. He looked at his own face, and for the first time since the collapse, he didn't look hollow. The sharpness around his eyes was softer. The line of his mouth was less bitter. His hand, once always curled into a tight fist of control, now held something fragile and pure. The hallway behind them was quiet. No reporters, no nurses, just Maya and the man she called Mr. J. And in that reflection, Something remarkable had happened. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like someone becoming whole. 2 weeks had passed since Julian Croft stood in that hospital therapy room, Maya's hand clasped quietly in his. Word of his unorthodox recovery had begun to spread in whispers, though he'd made every effort to keep it quiet. But the world had a way of sniffing out stories, especially the kind no one could explain. By Monday morning, it was no longer a whisper. The local news had gotten its hands on a grainy cell phone photo, a little girl in a red hoodie watching from a hallway as the billionaire CEO took his first unassisted steps. It was blurry, slightly overexposed, but undeniably real. The headline ran like wildfire: "The mystery girl who made a CEO walk again." Julian's hospital room, once his sanctuary, now buzzed with intrusion. Legal advisors, communications representatives, and his chief of PR all huddled around his bed like a swarm of hornets. Clipboards and image control memos had replaced the crayon drawings. Maya's artwork had been taken down for the sake of professionalism. And worst of all, Maya wasn't there. He stared at the empty corner where she used to sit, sketchbook in her lap, juice box in hand. His hands itched to hold something, her latest drawing, a yarn charm, anything. But there was only a tablet glowing with financial red. The company's stock was falling. The press had seized on every detail. Dr. Marcus Thorne, the hospital's chief neurologist, had gone on record with a scathing quote: "We're witnessing a textbook case of post-traumatic dependency and emotional transference. The girl is being weaponized, intentionally or not, by a man in cognitive disarray." Julian clenched his jaw so hard it ached. "They're going to dig until they find her," his PR manager said, her voice tense. "The longer she stays in the picture, the worse this gets. We need to shut this down. Let the narrative pivot." "She's a child," Julian snapped, "not a PR threat." "She's not your child," another executive added coldly. The words hit harder than expected. That night, Julian refused all visitors and turned off every device. He sat in the dark, alone, until sleep finally found him like a thief. The next morning, Maya didn't come. By noon, still. Nothing. By 3 p.m., Julian was pacing the therapy hallways, pushing himself harder than ever before, his fury disguised as focus. His spine ached. His muscles burned. But none of it compared to the gaping hole her absence had left behind. Then a nurse appeared, one of the kind ones, the one with the sunflower pin on her scrubs. "Mr. Croft," she said gently, "I thought you'd want to know. The little girl, Maya, she's in the pediatric ward. Pneumonia." It came on fast. He didn't wait. Monitors screamed as Julian tore the heart rate leads from his chest. Alarms were triggered instantly. Nurses shouted as he shoved aside the rolling IV stand and reached for his wheelchair, but it was too far. So he walked, moving in desperate bursts. 10 steps, a palm pressed against the wall, his breath burning in his lungs. No assistance, no shoes, just pure adrenaline, panic, and a rising heat in his chest that had nothing to do with recovery. "Where is she?" he roared as he stormed through the hallway, barefoot and breathless. A nurse tried to stop him. He waved her off. "Out of my way." Someone radioed for security, but no one dared to block his path. He found her in room 421, curled beneath thin blankets, her skin pale, her cheeks flushed with fever. Oxygen tubes trailed from her nose. Clara sat beside the bed, her eyes red-rimmed, holding Maya's limp hand. She looked up as Julian entered, startled. "Mr. Croft?" He didn't speak. He simply crossed the room, sat on the edge of the bed, and took Maya's other hand in his. Her fingers were too small, too cold. Her breathing was raspy and shallow. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Hey, little spark, you hear me?" Nothing. Julian turned to Clara. What happened? The fever hit fast, she said, barely holding herself together. She didn't tell me she was feeling sick. I think she didn't want to miss seeing you. He looked down at the girl who had broken through every wall he'd ever built, who had handed him light and laughter without asking for anything in return. And now she was the one who was fading. No, he said firmly, as if he were negotiating a hostile merger. Not you, not her. Then he leaned in and whispered into Maya's ear, "Now it's my turn to guard your spark." For the next 24 hours, he didn't leave her side. He read aloud from her sketchbook as if it were scripture. He sang, badly, songs she liked from the cartoons she had made him watch. He cleaned her hands gently with warm cloths and traced the stitches of her little angel charm as if it could carry his own strength back into her. By morning, her color had improved. By afternoon, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Mr. J." He nearly collapsed in relief. "I thought I dreamed you," she said, her voice faint. "No dream," he whispered back. "You scared the hell out of me, kiddo." She gave him the faintest of smiles. "You said a bad word." "Worth it." Tessa sobbed quietly from the corner of the room. Later, a nurse brought in Maya's belongings, her hoodie, her sketchbook, and a drawing that was half finished, torn at the corner. It showed Julian, not as a CEO, not as a man in a wheelchair, but kneeling beside a girl with angel wings, both of them surrounded by a brilliant golden light. He taped it to the hospital window for the world to see. As dusk fell across Chicago, reporters stood outside the hospital, their cameras flashing at every shadow. Inside, Julian never looked at them. He was too busy holding Maya's hand, a silent promise etched into every beat of his heart. "You saved me. Now I save you." The boardroom was quiet, save for the low hum of a projector and the slow sip of black coffee in Julian Croft's hand. The man at the head of the table was no longer the pale, cold figure who once built glass towers as monuments to solitude. There was a subtle softness to him now, a quiet steadiness. His voice, though still precise, carried a different weight. "This isn't a proposal," he said, clicking to the final slide of his presentation. "It's a decision." Across the table, his executive team stared, their expressions a mixture of surprise and confusion. On the screen behind him was the branding package for Clara's Table, a rebranded, upgraded version of the food truck run by Maya's mother. It featured bold colors, clean lines, and at the bottom, the words, "Official catering partner of Croft Enterprises Tower." Someone cleared their throat. "You want to bring in a taco truck?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "I want to bring in her truck. She's earned it." "It's highly unconventional." "It's intentional," he interrupted. "This isn't charity. It's an investment. She just needs infrastructure, guidance, and a solid platform to scale." "And you're giving her mentorship too?" Julian nodded. "And a team of developers. They're building her a website, an app-based ordering system, and social media content. The marketing team will handle PR. I want her at every grand opening we have moving forward." Silence. Then slowly, someone began to clap. Others followed. Julian didn't smile, but inside, he felt it. A root sinking into new soil. By Friday afternoon, the air outside the construction site was filled with the sizzle of grilled onions and the cheerful chatter of people gathered around the newly wrapped truck. The fresh navy paint gleamed under strings of hanging Edison bulbs. A soft chalkboard sign read, "Tacos and second chances. Try both?" Julian stood beside the counter, his sleeves rolled to his forearms, a napkin tucked comically into his shirt collar. A small streak of salsa decorated the corner of his mouth. He didn't notice. He was too busy laughing. Maya was beside him, dipping fries into guacamole, and talking nonstop. Clara manned the window, barking orders with the efficiency of a woman reborn in her purpose. 2 carne, 1 veggie, no cilantro, and someone get Mr. J another horchata before he passes out. I'm pacing myself, Julian called back, raising his hands in surrender. He looked ridiculous in his Tom Ford slacks and salsa-stained shirt, but he had never looked more human, more real. The air was filled with a sense of community. Construction workers, interns, old neighbors from Clara's street, all were drawn to the warmth of something that wasn't just business anymore. It was belonging. That evening, they returned to the apartment. Not Julian's penthouse, not a hotel suite, but the little walk-up above the laundromat where life clung to every corner. Maya curled up on the couch, her cheeks flushed from the day's excitement. Her sketchbook lay open on the floor beside her, half finished. This time it was a picture of the food truck with her, Clara, and Julian all standing behind the counter. Above them, she had drawn a banner that read, "We work together now." Julian took a seat beside her, a book in hand. He'd brought Charlotte's Web this time. Maya had picked it out herself from the hospital library before she was discharged. It's about loyalty, she had told him, and saving people. He opened to the next chapter and began to read aloud. His voice was low and steady, almost musical in its rhythm. Halfway through the page, Maya's head lulled sideways and gently landed on his shoulder. He paused. She didn't stir. Clara peeked out from the kitchen, her eyes soft, then silently returned to cleaning up. Julian looked down at the girl whose presence had shattered every barrier he had built over a decade. She breathed evenly now, safely, peacefully. His free hand hovered for a moment, then settled over hers. He didn't move. Not when the story ended. Not when the lights in the room dimmed. Not even when his phone vibrated with a bored inquiry about international expansion. He let the buzz die unanswered. He leaned his cheek lightly against Maya's hair and whispered, "Just for her, I'll stay right here." Because the future he was building now wasn't made of steel beams or market shares. It was made of moments like this, warm, quiet, and true. And in that silence, surrounded by the echoes of laughter and crayon sketches, Julian Croft finally understood what it meant to be home. 1 year later, the skyline of Chicago gleamed under a soft golden haze, the sun melting over the glass towers and scaffolding like honey. The plaza in front of the newly completed Croft Enterprises Tower buzzed with energy. Rows of white folding chairs filled the wide-open space. Garlands of paper stars swayed gently from canopies overhead, and in the center stood a small, polished podium, wrapped in a light blue ribbon. At the front of the crowd sat Julian Croft, upright and strong in a tailored gray suit. There was no wheelchair, no cane, just him, standing with a quiet ease. His hand rested gently over Maya's, who sat beside him in a yellow sundress and sparkly shoes that lit up when she walked. Behind them sat Clara, radiant in a floral blouse, and next to her a new face, Olivia Croft, Julian's sister, her hand draped casually across Clara's shoulder. It had taken a year to rebuild that relationship, but today, they weren't two separate worlds. They were family. The MC's voice cut through the music. And now we invite Maya Monroe to the stage to share a few words as we officially unveil the Angel Spark Foundation, dedicated to the memory of her late grandmother. Julian gave Maya's hand a squeeze. She looked up at him with a smile full of nerves and excitement. "You've got this," he whispered. She nodded once, slipped off her chair, and walked confidently across the stage. There was no limp, no hesitation, just a quiet kind of bravery, the kind that isn't taught but earned. She climbed the steps alone. The crowd hushed. Maya adjusted the microphone and looked out, all freckles and firelight. My mom used to say that people carry sparks inside them, she began, her voice clear and bright. Even when they feel broken, even when they think the light is gone. She took a breath. Mr. J helped me keep mine, and I think I helped him find his again. Soft laughter rippled through the audience. So now we have this place, she continued, gesturing to the gleaming tower behind her. For other people who forgot they still shine. It's for kids who've been through hard stuff, and for people who don't want to give up, even when everything hurts. She looked down at Julian, her eyes soft. You're not the man from the rubble anymore, Mr. J. You've got light in your heart. The applause came like a wave, gentle at first, then rising into something full and radiant. As Maya walked back down the steps, Julian stood on his own and met her at the bottom. Then, without hesitation, he knelt. A hush fell over the crowd again. No one moved. His knees touched the stone, steady and sure. Doctors had told him this motion might never return, but there he was, eye to eye with the girl who had saved him. He took both of her hands in his. And you're the angel who found it. She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her like she was something sacred. Clara rose to her feet. Olivia joined her. The four of them embraced at the foot of the stage. Not posed, not polished, but real. That evening, under the soft glow of lantern light in the tower's rooftop garden, the celebration continued. Children painted at easels, families laughed over handmade tacos, and music drifted on the warm breeze. In one corner, a new mural shimmered. It was Maya's crayon vision, brought to life by a local artist, a glowing heart stitched together with angel wings, light bursting from its center. Julian stood with a cup of cider in one hand, watching Maya spin with two other little girls on the dance floor. She's not afraid of anything, Olivia said, coming to stand beside him. No, he replied, but she taught me not to be either. Clara joined them, brushing flour from her hands. We sold out of every single empanada. Of course you did, Julian grinned. Good thing I locked you into a 5-year contract. They shared a laugh that came from somewhere deep, a laugh earned through grief, stubbornness, and second chances. Later that night, long after the guests had gone and the stars had blinked into full view, Julian walked Maya up to her room in the new apartment, 2 floors above his own. It had 3 bedrooms, sunlight in the mornings, and a tiny bookshelf already overflowing with her favorites. As she changed into her pajamas, he sat on the edge of her bed, leafing through her latest sketchbook. One page stopped him cold. It showed a stick-figure family, a man with a dark suit and brown hair, a woman with curly hair and an apron, and a girl in a yellow dress. Beside them stood another woman, Olivia, with her hand on Clara's shoulder. All of them were standing beneath a banner that read, "Our Home." Maya climbed into bed and yawned. "Mr. J? Yeah? You're not leaving, right?" He looked at her, his eyes wet but steady. "Never again." She nodded once, rolled to her side, and within seconds was asleep, her fingers still curled loosely around one of the old angel charms. Grant stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching. The man who once built towers to avoid people had now built something else entirely, a life, a family, a future. And this time, it wasn't made of steel or numbers or silence. It was made of late-night readings, handmade drawings, shared tacos, warm hands, and the unshakable belief that sometimes the smallest spark is all it takes to bring a man back from the dead. He turned off the light, whispered, "Good night, my little spark," and closed the door behind him. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we invite you to stay with us. Because here at Restoring Tales, every story reminds us that love, kindness, and second chances still exist. There are more tales waiting of resilience, of hope, and of quiet heroes among us. So if you believe in the healing power of love and the beauty of life's small moments, Be sure to subscribe to Restoring Tales and turn on notifications, because the next story might be the one your heart has been waiting for. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.